You don't have those kinds of resources available. Rachel, you need to face reality here. My dad blocked the entrance to my small condo, his stance rigid and unyielding. Mom stood behind him, lips pressed together in silent agreement. I was frozen there while my 8-year-old boy, Lucas, slept in the bedroom nearby. Even through the closed door, I could hear the mechanical rhythm of his respirator. Medical invoices covered my kitchen counter like evidence of everything I couldn't provide. $78,000. That's what the specialized physician quoted for the innovative procedure that might give Lucas a chance at survival. His uncommon cardiac disorder had stopped responding to standard medical interventions, and our window was closing fast. I'm Rachel, 32 years old, living in Portland, Oregon. I teach high school biology while raising Lucas by myself. His father disappeared when Lucas received his diagnosis at 4. He simply couldn't cope with having an ill child. That happened 5 years ago, and I'd been waging this war solo ever since. My parents resided just 15 minutes away in their spacious ranch-style home, where my younger sister Jennifer's childhood room remained untouched like some kind of memorial. Reality, I echoed, my throat tightening. My child could die without this procedure. His specialist said we're looking at maybe 8 months without intervention. Mom moved closer, touching Dad's shoulder in that particular way she used when trying to soften his stance without actually disagreeing. Sweetheart, we know this is incredibly hard, but we've already contributed so much through the years. We covered 4 of his operations. We simply cannot drain our retirement funds. I'm not suggesting you drain anything. I'm asking to borrow the money. I'll repay every cent. I'll find additional employment. Whatever it takes. Dad shook his head firmly. Rachel, you're struggling as it is. How exactly would repayment work? Think logically. There are installment options, healthcare credit programs. You should explore those avenues. I had explored them. I dedicated countless hours investigating every possibility. The installment plans required too much time. Lucas didn't have years ahead of him. The healthcare financing institutions demanded interest percentages that would crush me for life, and most rejected me anyway since I was already buried in medical obligations. I've exhausted every other option, I said softly. You're all I have left. Mom's expression wavered slightly, and briefly I believed she might sway Dad. But then he spoke again, his tone unwavering. We cannot do this, Rachel. I apologize, but we must consider our own security as well. We're getting older ourselves. They departed soon after, and I remained at the window, watching their sedan drive off. The burden of their rejection pressed down on me like something physical. I entered Lucas's room and settled beside his bed, listening to the constant hiss of oxygen equipment. His narrow chest moved unevenly. He appeared so tranquil sleeping, unaware that his own grandparents had essentially condemned him. I started making calls the following morning. I contacted every relative I could remember. Second cousins, Mom's brothers and sisters, anyone who might assist. Most provided sympathy and modest sums that barely registered. My Aunt Margaret mailed $400 with a message saying she wished she could do more. I valued every contribution, but I was attempting to fill a reservoir with an eyedropper. 3 weeks later, I returned from an especially difficult day teaching to discover Lucas having severe respiratory distress. His lips had a bluish cast that sent terror through my entire body. I summoned emergency services and they transported him immediately. The physicians stabilized his condition, but the heart specialist approached me afterward with a somber look. His condition is declining more rapidly than our projections, Dr. Stevens explained. Without that intervention we discussed previously, I'd estimate 4 months maximum, possibly fewer. I managed a numb nod, incapable of speech beyond the constriction in my throat. My baby had 4 months unless I could locate $78,000. I launched an online fundraising effort that evening, pouring everything into the description, uploading images of Lucas's radiant smile from healthier times. Colleagues shared it, fellow teachers donated, even some parents of my students contributed. But after 3 weeks, I'd accumulated only $11,000. Nowhere near sufficient. Then Jennifer called. My sister's voice bubbled with enthusiasm. Rachel, I have incredible news. Marcus proposed. We're getting married. I attempted to generate excitement despite the heaviness filling my chest. That's fantastic, Jennifer. Congratulations. I know, right? And Mom and Dad are being unbelievably generous. They're financing the entire wedding. Can you imagine? They told us we can have anything we want. No spending restrictions. Marcus and I are considering a destination celebration. Perhaps Greece or the French Riviera. Oh, Rachel, it's going to be absolutely magical. My grip tightened on the phone. No spending restrictions. None whatsoever. Dad said this is his princess's big moment and nothing is beyond reach. We're consulting with event coordinators next week. The wedding isn't for 14 months, but we want to begin planning immediately to secure exactly what we envision. I stood in my cramped condo, medical statements piled on every flat surface, my son struggling for each breath nearby, and listened to my sister rhapsodize about her unlimited wedding budget. Something frozen and immovable crystallized in my chest, a seed of comprehension that would take hold and flourish in the coming months. The following months dissolved into a haze of hospital stays and deepening hopelessness. I maxed out every credit account I possessed, secured personal loans at exploitative rates, and sold anything valuable I owned. My grandmother's necklace, the single heirloom from my own mother I'd received, went to a pawn dealer for $700. My vehicle got replaced with a 17-year-old compact that barely functioned. I relocated from my one-bedroom condo to a studio to reduce expenses. Throughout everything, Jennifer's wedding arrangements advanced like some inevitable juggernaut. Every family gathering, every telephone conversation, every exchange somehow revolved back to the wedding. My parents were obsessed with it. Sampling cuisine at exclusive restaurants, touring locations in Santorini through video conferences, debating floral designs that exceeded my monthly income. I attempted to feel happy for Jennifer. Genuinely tried. She was my younger sister and we'd once been connected. But that connection had deteriorated through the years as it became apparent that our parents viewed us through completely different lenses. Jennifer was the favored child, the one who executed everything flawlessly. She graduated university summa cum laude, secured a coveted position at an advertising agency, dated suitable men from established families. I was the one who conceived at 24 with a man who proved worthless, who selected teaching over a more profitable profession, who couldn't even maintain her son's health. One evening in August, Mom called me. Rachel, dear, we need to discuss the wedding. What about it? I was drained, having just completed a summer instruction session and spent 4 hours at the hospital with Lucas. Well, Jennifer wants you as a bridesmaid naturally, but the gowns will be approximately $350, and we need your order placed soon. $350. I calculated immediately. That represented nearly 3 weeks of Lucas's prescriptions. I don't know if that's financially feasible right now. Pause followed. Rachel, this is your sister's wedding. I understand, but circumstances are really difficult. Lucas's medical costs. You're constantly mentioning Lucas's medical costs. Mom interjected, her voice developing an edge. I comprehend he's ill, but existence continues for everyone else. This is Jennifer's special moment. I shut my eyes. Can I consider it? The ordering deadline is in 1 week. Jennifer has her heart set on including you in the wedding party. After we disconnected, I sat in the darkness of my studio condo and wept. How had things reached this point? How had my family become so oblivious to what was occurring? My son was dying and they were concerned about bridesmaid gowns and reception arrangements. Lucas's condition continued deteriorating. The innovative treatment was no longer viable. We'd missed our opportunity. The physicians transitioned to comfort care, concentrating on managing his pain. Daily I watched my son diminish incrementally, his vibrant essence fading alongside his physical vitality. He stopped inquiring when he could return to classes. He stopped discussing his dream of becoming an astronaut when he matured. He understood, in that way children somehow understand, that his time was limited. I requested an unpaid leave from teaching to remain with him. My administrator was compassionate, but without salary, my already precarious financial circumstances became devastating. I submitted applications to every aid program, every foundation, every charitable organization I could identify. Most had waiting periods extending months or eligibility requirements I didn't satisfy. In October, 6 months after my parents declined to help, Jennifer's bachelorette celebration occurred. Mom called to describe everything. They'd leased a seaside estate in Monterey for the weekend. 15 of Jennifer's dearest friends. All costs covered by our parents. Wine experiences, wellness treatments, a personal culinary chef. It was absolutely enchanting, Mom gushed. Jennifer was so elated. You should have witnessed her expression. What was the cost? I asked, unable to restrain myself. Oh, I'm not certain exactly. Your father managed those details. Perhaps $12,000. But it was justified to see Jennifer so blissful. $12,000. More than 15% of what might have saved Lucas spent on a single weekend. I felt something inside me fracture. A foundation of family obligation I'd been clutching despite everything. That sounds lovely, I said flatly. You know, Rachel, I wish you'd attempt to demonstrate more enthusiasm about this wedding. Jennifer feels like you're not genuinely supporting her. I released a laugh, a harsh sound that startled even myself. Jennifer feels I'm not supporting her. She does. She's observed you've been withdrawn. And you still haven't confirmed whether you'll be a bridesmaid. Cannot afford the gown, Mom. Told you this. Well, perhaps if you handled your finances better, you wouldn't constantly be in this predicament. The words suspended in the air like toxin. Handled my finances better. As if I'd been spending recklessly instead of battling to keep my child alive. As if the overwhelming burden of medical debt was some kind of character flaw rather than the consequence of a failing healthcare system and a family that selected expensive parties over their grandson's existence. I need to go, I said. Lucas needs me. Of course he does, Mom replied. And I detected the unspoken criticism in her tone. You know, Rachel, perhaps if you weren't so fixated on Lucas's problems constantly, you'd be capable of enjoying existence more. Jennifer manages to balance everything so effectively. I disconnected without farewell. November brought a frigid spell that seemed to penetrate my bones. Lucas was hospitalized repeatedly, his small frame fighting a battle he couldn't win. The physician spoke in hushed tones about days, not weeks. I spent every possible moment beside his bed, reading his preferred books, describing stories about what paradise might resemble, clutching his hand through the suffering. My parents visited occasionally, typically en route to or from some wedding-related appointment. They'd remain 25 minutes, pat Lucas's hand uncomfortably, and depart with expressions of relief. It was painful watching their discomfort around their dying grandson. Painful seeing how anxious they were to escape back to the cheerier world of wedding preparations. Jennifer came once. She stood in Lucas's hospital room doorway, impeccably dressed in designer clothing that likely exceeded my rent, and barely lasted 7 minutes before claiming she needed to leave for a gown fitting. He's so frail, she whispered to me in the corridor, as if this was revelation, as if I hadn't watched my son deteriorate day by day. Yes, I said simply. It must be so difficult for you. She touched my arm in a gesture that might have been intended as comfort but felt artificial. But you're so resilient, Rachel. You always have been resilient. I'd heard that descriptor so frequently in the past year, usually from people who were relieved they didn't need to be resilient themselves. Resilient enough not to require assistance. Resilient enough to watch your child die while your family spent a fortune on entertainment. The wedding is in 4 weeks, Jennifer continued. I genuinely hope you'll reconsider being a bridesmaid. It would signify so much to me and it might benefit you. You know, an opportunity to celebrate something joyful, to get a respite from all this. A respite. As if I could take a holiday from my son's death. As if I could wear a smile and an overpriced gown and pretend everything was acceptable while Lucas fought for each breath. I'll consider it, I lied because it was simpler than explaining how her words affected me. The wedding announcements had arrived at my condo 3 months earlier. Thick paper with silver foiling. The announcement package alone likely cost $60 per recipient. I calculated automatically now, converting everything into medical interventions we couldn't afford. I learned subsequently that the final expense of Jennifer's wedding was $215,000. $215,000. The figure reverberated in my mind like a scream. They'd spent nearly triple what might have saved Lucas's existence on a single day of festivity. The location alone cost $75,000, approximately what I'd pleaded for. The flowers were $18,000. The catering was $38,000. The gown was $11,000. I learned these figures gradually through overheard discussions and Mom's offhand remarks. She had no comprehension what each figure did to me, how every dollar amount felt like being stabbed. Or perhaps she did comprehend and simply didn't care. 3 weeks before the wedding, Lucas had an especially critical episode. His heart was failing, the monitors shrieking their alerts, nurses rushing in. I stood beside his bed, gripping his small hand, and watched the medical team struggle to stabilize him. They succeeded, but Dr. Stevens approached me afterward. Rachel, he doesn't have much time remaining. Hours, perhaps 2 days. I think you should consider summoning family, anyone who might want to say goodbye. Called my parents. Dad answered, sounding preoccupied. Rachel, we're in the midst of the final rehearsal preparations. Can this wait? Lucas is dying, I said, my voice empty. The physician says hours at most. Pause then. Oh Rachel, I'm terribly sorry. Do you need us there? Do I need you there? My son, their grandson, was dying and he was asking if I needed them there. Yes, I said. I think Lucas would want to see you. Naturally, we'll try to visit tomorrow. We have the final location inspection in the afternoon, but possibly in the morning. They came the following day, arriving at 9:30 with coffee shop beverages in their hands. They remained 12 minutes. Lucas was barely conscious. His breathing strained even with oxygen at maximum. Mom cried somewhat, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue that probably cost more than Lucas's meal. Dad stood rigidly near the door, checking his watch twice. We have to go, Dad finally said. The florist is expecting us at 10:30. The florist, I repeated numbly. For the table arrangements. It's important we finalize this correctly. There's no margin for error this close to the wedding. He seemed unaware of the irony of his words. Standing in a room where the ultimate error, selecting flowers over family, was about to claim its final victim. They departed with promises to return soon. Promises I knew they wouldn't honor. Jennifer never came to say goodbye to her nephew. She was too occupied with last-minute wedding crises, like the fact that the harpist she'd hired had developed tendinitis and been replaced. This was apparently an emergency worth multiple frantic calls. Lucas died on a Thursday afternoon, 5 days before Jennifer's wedding. He slipped away peacefully in his sleep, his small hand in mine. The nurse who confirmed his death cried more than my parents would when I called to inform them. Mom's first words after I told her Lucas was gone. Oh no. Oh Rachel. Oh. What unfortunate timing. Unfortunate timing. Because the funeral would conflict with the wedding preparations. That was the moment something fundamental transformed inside me. The grief was crushing. But beneath it, I felt something else developing. Cold, patient comprehension. They'd made their decision. Now I would make mine. The funeral was scheduled for Tuesday, 4 days before Jennifer's Saturday wedding. I didn't request my parents to change the wedding date. I didn't ask Jennifer to postpone. I knew what the response would be, and I didn't have the strength to hear them explain why their celebration was more significant than my son's burial. What I didn't anticipate was them asking me to reschedule the funeral. Mom called Wednesday evening. "Rachel, dear, we need to discuss the funeral arrangements." I was sitting in Lucas's room, surrounded by his belongings. His favorite space poster, his collection of shells he'd found at the beach, the microscope set I'd purchased him last birthday that he'd been too ill to use. What about them? Well, Tuesday is really problematic for us. We have the wedding rehearsal that afternoon and the dinner in the evening. Everything's scheduled, deposits submitted. Could you possibly reschedule the funeral to Monday or perhaps next week? I stared at the wall, unable to process what I was hearing. You want me to change my son's funeral because it conflicts with wedding rehearsal? It's not just rehearsal, Rachel. It's the entire schedule. We have distant guests arriving. Marcus's family flying in from Dallas. Your father is delivering a speech at the dinner. We cannot miss it. Lucas is your grandson, and we'll be there to honor him. Course we will. But Monday would work so much better for everyone. The funeral home should be able to accommodate the modification. Everyone. My voice came out flat, emotionless. I was beyond anger, beyond hurt. I'd entered some new territory where feeling anything seemed impossible. Everyone would be more convenient if we buried my 9-year-old son early so you don't miss appetizers. Don't be theatrical, Rachel. You're making this sound worse than it is. We're trying to support you and Jennifer both. Why can't you be more accommodating? You know how significant this wedding is to your sister. I disconnected. I didn't trust myself to say anything else. The funeral remained scheduled for Tuesday. I arranged it myself, paid for it with money I borrowed from my school administrator, who'd been more supportive in the past year than my own parents. It was a small service, just 18 people. My Aunt Margaret came, some colleagues from school, a few parents of Lucas's former classmates. My parents arrived 50 minutes late, dressed in clothes clearly selected for the wedding festivities to follow. They stayed for the service but departed immediately after, skipping the small gathering I'd organized at my condo. "We really must go," Mom said, kissing my cheek with lips that barely connected. "Jennifer is having an emergency about the place settings, but it was a beautiful service, Rachel. Very dignified. Dignified. My son's funeral was dignified." I watched them leave, watched them drive away to their important appointments and critical emergencies, and I felt something inside me turn to stone. The grief was still there, crushing and absolute, but it was contained now, locked behind a wall of ice-cold clarity. Friday, I spent alone in my condo, surrounded by condolence cards and medical statements. The crowdfunding effort that had raised $11,000 had been closed, the money depleted months ago on treatments that only postponed the inevitable. I owed $68,000 in medical debt, had maxed credit accounts totaling another $23,000, and my rent was 3 months overdue. Lucas's death hadn't ended my financial catastrophe. It had just made it meaningless. My phone buzzed with messages from distant relatives and colleagues asking if I was okay, if I needed anything. I didn't respond. What I needed was impossible. I needed my son back. I needed my parents to have been different people. I needed to wake up and discover the past year had been a nightmare. Saturday morning, Jennifer's wedding day. I woke at sunrise. I hadn't planned to think about it, hadn't wanted to acknowledge it was happening. But my phone illuminated with a text from Mom. "Wish you were here to share this special moment. Jennifer looks absolutely breathtaking." I stared at that message for a long time. Wish you were here. As if I'd simply opted not to attend. As if I was missing it because of a scheduling conflict rather than because I'd buried my son 4 days earlier. I got dressed and went for a walk. Portland was beautiful in late November. Leaves turning amber and crimson. Lucas had loved autumn. We'd planned to go to the corn maze this year. Just one more thing that would never happen. My phone continued buzzing throughout the day. Photographs from the wedding. Mom had added me to some kind of group message with extended family. I watched the images load one by one. The location in Santorini photographed at sunset. Jennifer in her designer gown. A dress that cost more than most people's vehicles. The floral designs elaborate and wasteful. The 6-tier cake. The champagne fountain. The string ensemble playing on a terrace overlooking the Aegean. $215,000 of celebration, while my son's body lay in a cemetery where I couldn't even afford a proper marker yet. I scrolled through the photographs with a strange sense of detachment. Everyone appeared so happy. Dad in his formal wear, radiating with pride. Mom, sophisticated in her mother of the bride ensemble that probably cost $4,000. Jennifer and her new husband, faces illuminated with joy and possibility. Extended family members I'd called pleading for help, now dressed in their finest, celebrating with champagne that cost more per bottle than they donated to Lucas's treatment fund. One photograph showed my parents dancing, Mom's head thrown back in laughter. The caption read, "Best day ever. So grateful." I set my phone down and walked to the bathroom. I looked at myself in the mirror. I'd lost 17 pounds in the past month. My eyes were sunken, circled with dark shadows. I looked like I'd aged a decade. I looked like someone who'd watched their child die while their family celebrated. That night, alone in my studio condo, I made myself a promise. This wasn't finished. They thought they could discard Lucas's existence, discard me, and move on to their happy celebrations without consequences. They thought their wealth and their social status and their self-centered priorities could shield them from accountability. They were mistaken. I didn't know how yet, but I would make them understand what they'd done. I would make them feel a fraction of what I'd felt. Not revenge exactly. Justice. Reckoning. I pulled out a journal and started documenting everything. Every conversation, every refusal, every dollar amount. I documented the timeline. When I'd asked for help, when they'd refused, when Jennifer's wedding planning began, when Lucas died. I wrote down who'd been at the funeral, who hadn't. I noted every expense Mom had mentioned for the wedding. I wasn't certain what I'd do with this information, but I knew I needed it. Evidence. Proof. A record of everything that had been stolen from Lucas. From me. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Mom. Home from Greece. Exhausted but so happy. Jennifer and Marcus's first dance was magical. I'll send you the video. I typed back. Glad you enjoyed it. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally. We'll visit next week to check on you. I'm sure you're feeling better by now. Feeling better. As if grief operated on a schedule. As if 1 week after your child's death, you were expected to be recovered and ready to hear about how magical someone else's celebration was. I didn't respond. The weeks after the wedding passed in a gray fog. I returned to work, moving through my days like a phantom. My students were kind, gentler with me than they'd ever been. The administration had granted me extended bereavement leave, but I'd declined. I needed the structure. Needed something to fill the hours that used to be consumed by medical appointments and medication schedules and hope. My parents called occasionally. Brief check-ins that felt more like duties than genuine concern. How are you managing? They'd ask, and then fill the silence with updates about Jennifer's honeymoon, about renovation projects they were planning, about holiday plans. They never mentioned Lucas. It was as if he'd never existed, as if acknowledging his absence might spoil their good mood. Jennifer sent a single text. I'm sorry about everything. I hope we can move forward. Move forward. Move forward from watching my son die. Move forward from being abandoned by my family. Move forward from the fact that she'd had a $250,000 wedding while my child suffocated to death because we couldn't afford treatment. I didn't respond to that either. In January, 3 months after Lucas's death, my parents invited me to New Year's dinner. I almost declined, but curiosity got the better of me. I wanted to see them, to understand how they lived with what they'd done. Their house was decorated like something from a lifestyle magazine. A 14-foot tree, professionally decorated, garlands and lights on every surface. The smell of expensive catering filled the air. Jennifer and Marcus were already there when I arrived, looking tanned and relaxed from their honeymoon in Bali. Rachel, Mom hugged me, her perfume overwhelming. I'm so glad you came. We've missed you. I stood stiffly in her embrace. Thank you for inviting me. Dinner was elaborate. Prime rib, lobster tails, sides I couldn't identify. Wine that Dad proudly announced cost $250 a bottle. Everyone talked and laughed, sharing stories from the wedding, from the honeymoon, from their comfortable existences. I sat quietly, pushing food around my plate. Rachel, you're so quiet, Jennifer said, her voice carrying that concerned tone that didn't reach her eyes. Are you okay? I'm fine. You know, Marcus and I were thinking, maybe you should consider relocating somewhere else. Fresh start might help you heal. Portland has too many painful memories now. I looked at her, at this woman who was my sister in name only. Where would I go? I don't know. Somewhere less expensive, maybe. I know you're struggling financially. Marcus's company has an office in Phoenix. Cost of living is much lower there. We could help you find something. Help me move away. Remove the uncomfortable reminder of their choices. I'll think about it, I said. Another lie. Dad cleared his throat. Rachel, your mother and I have been discussing your situation. We think you need to consider bankruptcy. It's the responsible thing to do given your debt. Bankruptcy. For your medical bills. You'll never pay them off on a teacher's salary. Better to just wipe the slate clean and start over. Start over. As if Lucas was a mistake to be corrected, a financial error to be written off. We could help you find a good bankruptcy attorney, Mom added. Your father knows several. I set down my fork carefully. You know what would have helped? $78,000 16 months ago. The table went silent. Jennifer looked at Marcus uncomfortably. Mom's smile froze in place. Rachel, Dad said, his voice carrying a warning. We've been over this. Have we? Because I don't remember us ever really discussing it. You said no and that was it. We made a difficult decision based on our financial situation. Your financial situation. I gestured around the room. This doesn't look like financial difficulty. The $215,000 wedding doesn't suggest financial difficulty. Jennifer's face flushed. That's not fair. Isn't it? I stood up, my chair scraping against their expensive hardwood floor. You spent almost triple what could have saved Lucas's life on a single day. Party. Flowers and cake and a dress you'll wear once. Rachel, that's enough, Dad said, standing as well. His face was red, angry. We made the choice we thought was right. We're not going to apologize for supporting your sister's happiness. And Lucas's life. What about supporting that? He was ill, Mom said, her voice shaking. The physician said there was no guarantee the procedure would work. We weren't going to throw away money on something that might not even help. But you'd throw away more than double that amount on party favors and centerpieces that went in the trash the next day. Get out, Dad said. If you're going to be disrespectful, you can leave. I grabbed my coat. Don't worry, I'm going. You're just bitter because your life didn't turn out the way you wanted. Jennifer called after me. It's not our fault you made bad choices. I stopped at the door and turned back. They were all standing now, a unified front against me. My parents, my sister, her husband. All of them comfortable, secure, righteous in their positions. Bad choices, I repeated. Like trusting family, like believing blood meant something, like thinking you'd choose your grandson over a party. I walked out into the cold January night and got into my beat-up car. I sat there for a moment, watching through the window as they settled back down to their expensive dinner, probably already dismissing me as dramatic, unstable, ungrateful. That was the last time I spoke to any of them for 5 years. Life continued because that's what it does. I declared bankruptcy as Dad had suggested, eliminating most of my medical debt but destroying my credit for years to come. I relocated to a cheaper condo in a worse neighborhood. I took on tutoring jobs in the evenings and summers to make ends meet. I existed, but I didn't live. I also planned. I couldn't touch them yet. I was too powerless, too broken, too consumed with grief and survival. But I was patient. I watched from a distance, following their lives through social media accounts they didn't realize I could still see. I documented everything, adding to my journals. Waited. Jennifer got pregnant 14 months after her wedding. Mom posted constant updates about the pregnancy, the baby shower, the nursery preparations. The baby, a girl named Olivia, arrived healthy and perfect. The photographs showed my parents beaming, holding their first grandchild, as if Lucas had never existed, as if Olivia was their first and only. I saw one comment on Mom's social media post from a distant cousin. "Your first grandchild. So exciting." Mom's response. "Yes, we're over the moon." Not a correction. Not even an acknowledgement that another grandchild had existed, had died, had mattered. Lucas had been erased from the family narrative. I took a screenshot and added it to my collection. 3 years after Lucas's death, I went back to school, online classes at night, working toward a doctorate in education administration. I was promoted to vice principal after 4 years. The salary increase was modest, but it was progress. I was building something slowly and deliberately. I also started saving money. Every extra dollar went into a separate account, one I never touched. I didn't know what I was saving for exactly, but I knew I'd need resources eventually. Power required capital. During those years, my parents tried to reach out occasionally. Birthday cards with generic messages, holiday gifts sent through the mail, usually gift cards to stores I didn't shop at. Dad called once to tell me they'd established a small college fund for Olivia, and wondered if I wanted to contribute. I hung up on him. Jennifer sent a birth announcement when she had her second child, a boy named Ethan. The card featured a professional photo of their perfect family, expensive clothes, genuine smiles. On the back someone had written, "Hope you're doing well," as an afterthought. I kept every card, every announcement, every casual dismissal. Evidence. 5 years after Lucas's death, I was principal of a successful high school, earning enough to live comfortably, though I still kept my lifestyle modest. I'd rebuilt myself from nothing, created a life that had purpose and meaning even without the person who'd given it both. I'd also continued following my family's activities. Jennifer's husband Marcus had been promoted to senior vice president at his company. They'd purchased a larger house in an exclusive neighborhood. My parents had taken up tennis, joining an expensive athletic club. They traveled frequently, posting photos from beaches and European cities. Life was good for them, better than good. Then, in early spring, something changed. I received an email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line read, "Important family matter." I almost deleted it as spam, but something made me open it. "Rachel, this is your Aunt Margaret. I'm reaching out because I thought you should know that your father lost his position 4 months ago. He's been trying to keep it quiet, but the situation is serious. His entire retirement account was invested in his company stock, which collapsed when the company went bankrupt. Your parents have lost almost everything. They're facing foreclosure on their house. I know you and they aren't close, but I thought you'd want to know. Your father is too proud to ask for help, but they need it. Please call me if you can. Love, Margaret. I read the email 3 times. Then I went to my computer and started searching. It didn't take long to find the news articles. The company Dad had worked for, a regional technology firm, had been caught in a massive fraud scandal. The CEO was facing federal charges. The company had declared bankruptcy and thousands of employees had lost their jobs and their retirement savings. Dad's name appeared in several articles as one of the senior executives who'd lost everything. I sat back and stared at the screen. After all these years, after building their comfortable life on the grave of my son's memory, they'd lost it all. Karma, some might call it. Justice, others would say. I didn't have a name for what I felt. It wasn't satisfaction exactly. It was more like recognition. The universe had shifted, and suddenly I wasn't powerless anymore. My phone rang 10 days later. Mom's number. I stared at it, watching it ring, then go to voicemail. She called again the next day and the day after that. I never answered. Then came a knock on my door one evening in June. I looked through the peephole and saw Dad standing there. He looked older than I remembered. Grayer, thinner, diminished. I opened the door but left the chain engaged. Yes, Rachel. His voice cracked on my name. Please, we need to talk. About what? Can I come in? Whoa. He flinched. I know things have been difficult between us. I know we've made mistakes, but we're family. We need help. Help. I repeated, the word tasting strange in my mouth. I lost my position. You probably heard. We're in serious financial trouble. The house is in foreclosure. Your mother's health insurance ran out and she has some medical issues that need addressing. We're asking our daughters for help. Jennifer and Marcus are doing what they can, but they have their own family to support. We thought maybe you could contribute something, even a small amount. A loan perhaps that we could pay back when our situation improves. I stared at him through the gap in the door. When your situation improves. I know you're doing better now. I saw online that you're a principal. That must pay well. We wouldn't ask if we weren't desperate. Desperate, I said softly. That's interesting. I remember being desperate once. His face colored. Rachel, please. This isn't the time to dredge up the past. Isn't. I smiled, and it wasn't a kind expression. You're asking me for money because you're facing financial ruin. That sounds familiar. This is different. How? We're your parents. And Lucas was your grandson. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. How much do you need? Finally asked. Hope flared in his eyes. We owe about $85,000 on the house. If we could come up with that amount we could keep it, but anything would help. Even $20,000 or $30,000 would give us time to figure something out. $85,000. More than what could have saved Lucas. I felt something cold and final settle in my chest. I'll think about it, I said, and closed the door in his face. Behind the closed door, I leaned against the wall and smiled. Finally, after 5 years of waiting, of planning, of building myself back up from nothing, the opportunity I'd been waiting for had arrived. Now came the reckoning. I didn't contact my parents for 3 weeks. Let them wait. Let them wonder. Let them feel the anxiety of uncertainty. Every day that passed, their situation grew more dire. I knew this because I'd started checking the public foreclosure listings. Their house, the house I'd grown up in, was scheduled for auction in 50 days. During those 3 weeks, Mom called 21 times. Dad called 12. Jennifer sent 4 lengthy text messages explaining how our parents had always done their best, how they were good people who'd made some mistakes, how family was supposed to forgive and help each other. The irony was apparently lost on her. I responded to none of them. Instead, I did research. I looked into their financial situation as thoroughly as I could from the outside. The house was worth about $340,000, and they owed $85,000. They had equity, but not enough to start over somewhere nice. They'd have to move to a modest apartment, maybe in a less desirable area. They'd have to learn to live on Social Security and whatever Dad could scrape together from a new job, if anyone would hire a 64-year-old disgraced executive. It would be hard for them, humbling, a complete reversal of the comfortable life they'd built. But they'd survive. That was the difference between their situation and what Lucas had faced. They weren't going to die. They were just going to be uncomfortable. On the 22nd day, I finally called Dad back. "Rachel," he sounded breathless, desperate. "Thank God. I was so worried you wouldn't call. I've been thinking about your request." And I could hear the hope in his voice, pathetic and naked. "I want to meet with all of you. You, Mom, and Jennifer. We need to have a conversation." Course. When? Where? "We can come to you or we could meet somewhere neutral. Whatever you prefer." "My condo. Sunday at 3. We'll be there." "Thank you, Rachel. You don't know what this means to us." I hung up without responding. Sunday arrived cold and overcast. Appropriate weather for what I had planned. I'd spent the morning preparing, arranging chairs in my small living room, setting out a folder on the coffee table. I'd printed documents, organized them chronologically. Everything was ready. They arrived at exactly 3, all 3 of them. Dad looked worse than he had at my door. His suit hanging loose on a frame that had lost weight. Mom seemed to have aged a decade, her hair more gray than I remembered, her face lined with worry. Jennifer looked uncomfortable, dressed too formally for my shabby condo, clutching her designer purse like armor. "Rachel," Mom said, moving as if to hug me. I stepped back. "Sit down." They arranged themselves on my second-hand couch, sitting close together like children called before a principal, which I supposed they were. I remained standing. "You asked me for $85,000. We know it's a lot," Dad started. "But we're prepared to offer collateral, to sign a formal loan agreement. We'd pay you back with interest." "How?" I asked flatly. "You have no income. Mom doesn't work. What would you use to pay me back?" "I'm looking for work. Something will come through. At 64, with your reputation attached to a fraud scandal." He flinched. "That wasn't my fault. I had no idea what the CEO was doing. Ignorance isn't innocence. You were a senior executive. You should have known." I picked up the folder from the coffee table. "But we're not here to discuss your career failures. We're here to discuss your request for money. Will you help us?" Mom asked, her voice small. "That depends. Have some questions first." I opened the folder and pulled out the first document. "Do you remember this conversation? June 18th, 5 years ago. I came to you and asked for $78,000 to pay for Lucas's procedure." Mom's face went pale. "Rachel, we've been over this." "Have we?" "Because I don't think we have." "Not really." "Not honestly." I held up the document, a printout of my original crowdfunding page with the procedure cost clearly listed. $78,000. You told me you couldn't afford it, that you had to think about your own retirement, that I needed to face reality. "We made the best decision we could at the time," Dad said stiffly. "Did you?" I pulled out another paper. "This is a receipt from Jennifer's wedding planner. Total cost of services, $215,000, paid in full by you, 19 months after you told me you couldn't afford $78,000 to save your grandson's life." Jennifer stood up. "This isn't fair. You're twisting everything." "Sit down," I said, my voice hard enough that she obeyed. "I'm not finished." I pulled out more documents, laying them on the coffee table one by one. Wedding venue, $75,000. Flowers, $18,000. Catering, $38,000. Dress, $11,000. Photographer, $9,000. Entertainment, $12,000. Should I continue? "What do you want from us?" Dad demanded. "An apology." "Fine. We're sorry. We made a mistake." "Is that what you want to hear?" "A mistake," I repeated softly. "You think choosing a party over your grandson's life was a mistake?" "We didn't know he was going to die," Mom whispered. Yes, you did. The physicians told you. Told you. You knew, and you didn't care enough to help. I pulled out another document, the one that hurt most to look at. A photo of Lucas in his hospital bed, taken 3 weeks before he died. This is what $78,000 would have saved. This child. Your grandson. Remember him. Mom started crying. Jennifer looked away. Dad stared at the photo with an expression I couldn't read. Rachel, please, Mom said through her tears. We know we failed you. We know we should have done more, but we can't change the past. We can only ask for your mercy now. Mercy. I placed the photo back in the folder carefully. That's interesting. I don't remember receiving much mercy when I begged you for help. When I sold everything I owned, when I maxed out every credit card, when I moved to a studio condo and ate instant noodles so I could afford Lucas's medications. We didn't understand how bad it was, Dad said. Didn't you? I told you multiple times. I showed you the medical bills. I explained that without the procedure, he would die. What part of that was unclear? Silence. But you understood perfectly well how important Jennifer's wedding was. You understood that the centerpieces needed to be exactly right, that the venue had to be perfect, that your daughter deserved the best money could buy. I sat down across from them, my voice calm and measured. Here's what I've learned in the past 5 years. You didn't help Lucas because you didn't want to. It wasn't about the money. You had the money. You proved that. It was about choice. You chose what mattered to you. That's not true, Jennifer protested. They were trying to protect their retirement. Were they? Because they spent almost triple their retirement concerns on your wedding. Math doesn't lie, Jennifer. Priorities don't lie. Dad leaned forward. Rachel, I understand you're angry. You have every right to be. But are you really going to punish us now when we need you most? Are you going to be as cruel as you think we were? Cruel, I said, tasting the word. Is it cruel to make choices based on what matters to you? Is it cruel to decide that your resources should go toward your own priorities rather than someone else's crisis? 'Cause that's what you taught me. That's the lesson you gave me when Lucas was dying. So you won't help us? Mom said flatly. I didn't say that. I picked up the folder and pulled out a check I'd prepared. I'm willing to give you $85,000. Hope bloomed on their faces, desperate and immediate. However, I continued, there are conditions. Anything, Dad said quickly. We'll sign whatever you want. Payment plans, interest, collateral. It's not about payment. I set the check on the table between us. It was made out for $85,000, dated for today. The first condition is that you acknowledge, here and now, that you chose Jennifer's wedding over Lucas's life. That you had the money and refused to help. I want to hear you say it. They stared at me. Jennifer looked at her parents. You don't have to do this. She's trying to humiliate you. Yes, I agreed. Just like you humiliated me when I begged for help. When I stood in your doorway with medical bills and you told me to face reality. When I buried my son alone because you had a rehearsal dinner. So yes, I want you to say it out loud, that you made a choice and Lucas died because of it. Mom was crying harder now. Dad's face was red, but they needed that check. They needed it desperately. We chose the wedding, Dad finally said. His voice barely audible. We had the money, and we chose to spend it on Jennifer's wedding instead of Lucas's procedure. And prompted. And he died because we didn't help. Mom, I looked at my mother. We should have helped you, she whispered. We should have saved him. We were wrong. I turned to Jennifer. And you? What's your role in this? I didn't know, she said quickly. I didn't know they'd refused to help Lucas. Didn't you? You never wondered where the money for your elaborate wedding came from. You never thought it was odd that I asked you to postpone your bachelorette party because Lucas was in the hospital and you refused. You never questioned having your wedding 5 days after your nephew's funeral. She had no answer. Here's the second condition, I continued. You take this money, you save your house, and you never contact me again. No birthday cards, no holiday gifts, no phone calls. You remove me from your lives completely. The way you removed Lucas from your memories. You go back to pretending I don't exist. Rachel, you can't mean that, Mom said. Or family. No, I corrected her. We share DNA. Family is something else. Family shows up. Family sacrifices. Family doesn't let children die while they plan parties. I stood up and walked to my door, opening it. Those are my conditions. Take the check or leave it. You have 60 seconds to decide. They looked at each other. A silent conversation happening in glances and expressions. I watched them calculate, watched them weigh their pride against their desperation. Took them 38 seconds. Dad picked up the check. We accept your conditions, he said, his voice hollow. But there's a document on the table next to the check. It's a formal agreement that you'll have no further contact with me. Sign it. They signed without reading it, which told me everything I needed to know about how desperate they really were. Dad's signature was shaky. Mom could barely hold the pen through her tears. Jennifer signed with angry, sharp strokes, her face red with suppressed rage. When they finished, I collected the document and handed them the check. You can go now. Rachel, Dad started, but I cut him off. You agreed to the conditions. No contact means no contact. Leave. They filed out silently. Mom crying, Dad's shoulders slumped, Jennifer walking stiffly beside them. I closed the door behind them and locked it. Then I walked to my bedroom and opened my laptop. I pulled up my bank account and looked at the balance. The $85,000 I'd just given them had been transferred from my savings this morning. That account now showed $14,000 remaining. Years of careful saving, of living modestly, of putting aside every extra penny, reduced to almost nothing. But I wasn't done. I opened my email and composed a message to my Aunt Margaret, the only family member who'd shown any real concern for me over the years. I attached a document, a letter I'd written months ago, waiting for the right time to send it. Aunt Margaret, I wanted you to know what really happened with Lucas. I've attached a complete timeline of events, including all the requests I made for help and the responses I received. I've also included documentation of the expenses my parents incurred during that same period, particularly regarding Jennifer's wedding. I thought the family should know the truth. Please share this with anyone you think should see it. Love, Rachel. I hit send. The document I'd attached was comprehensive. Every conversation, every refusal, every wedding expense, every hospital bill. The photo of Lucas in his hospital bed. Screenshots of Mom's social media posts calling Olivia her first grandchild. The timeline showing how my parents attended Jennifer's rehearsal dinner instead of Lucas's funeral reception. Everything laid out in chronological, undeniable detail. Aunt Margaret had a large extended family network. She was the type who forwarded emails to dozens of people, who shared everything on social media. By tomorrow, everyone would know. My parents' friends, their athletic club, their church, their neighbors. The truth would spread like wildfire. The check I'd given them would clear. They'd keep their house. But they'd lose something more valuable. Their reputation, their comfortable social standing, the image they'd carefully crafted of being generous, loving parents and grandparents. Everyone would know what they'd really chosen, what they'd really valued. A knock came at my door 2 hours later. I looked through the peephole and saw Jennifer standing there alone, her face furious. I opened the door but didn't invite her in. You signed an agreement not to contact me. That email you sent. You can't do that. You're ruining their lives. I'm telling the truth. There's a difference. You're vindictive and cruel. You're destroying them out of spite. No, I said calmly. I'm giving them exactly what they gave me. Consequences. Actions have consequences, Jennifer. They made choices and now they get to live with them. Just like I've had to live with watching my son die. They gave you $85,000. They gave me back a fraction of what they stole from Lucas, from me. And they only did it because they had no other choice. If they weren't desperate, would they have helped? We both know the answer. You're never going to let this go, are you? You're going to hate us forever. I don't hate you, I said, and realized it was true. Hate requires caring. I don't care about any of you anymore. You stopped being my family the day you chose a party over my son's life. Now you're just strangers who happen to share my last name. Mom is devastated. Dad looks broken. Was that worth it? Ask Lucas if it was worth it. Oh wait, you can't because he's dead. Jennifer's face crumpled. You really are as heartless as they said. Heartless? My heart broke 5 years ago, and you weren't there to see it. You were too busy planning your perfect wedding and your perfect life. So don't talk to me about heartless, Jennifer. You don't get to use that word. She turned and walked away, and I closed the door for the last time on my biological family. Over the next few months, I heard through indirect channels what happened to them. My parents were indeed socially ostracized. Friends stopped calling. The athletic club membership was quietly not renewed. Church attendance became awkward enough that they stopped going. They kept their house, but it became a prison of sorts, a place where they lived with their choices. Dad eventually found work as a consultant, making a fraction of his former salary. Mom developed anxiety issues and started therapy. Jennifer and Marcus moved to another state, putting distance between themselves and the scandal. Their holiday cards, which had once been elaborate productions, stopped coming altogether. I heard Mom told people I was dead, that it was easier than explaining why her daughter wanted nothing to do with her. I supposed I was dead to them. The daughter who'd been grateful for scraps, who'd accepted being second best, who'd swallowed her pain to keep the peace. That person didn't exist anymore. As for me, I continued building my life. I dated eventually, though carefully. I made real friends, the kind who showed up when things were hard. I traveled to places Lucas would have loved and scattered his ashes in beautiful locations around the world. I lived for both of us. The $85,000 I'd given my parents was worth it. Not because they deserved help, but because it gave me closure. I'd proven I was the better person, the one who showed mercy even when none had been shown to me. And then I'd walked away, leaving them to live with the weight of their choices. Some might say I was cruel. That real forgiveness means letting go completely, helping without conditions. But those people never watched their child die alone while their family celebrated elsewhere. They never had to choose between utilities and medicine. They never had to bury their baby with borrowed money while knowing $250,000 had been spent on cake and flowers. I gave my parents what they'd asked for, on my terms. I'd lived up to my obligation as their daughter one final time, and then I'd closed that door forever, just as they'd closed the door on Lucas when he needed them most. In the end, revenge wasn't about cruelty. It was about justice, about balance, about ensuring that consequences met actions. They taught me that family was conditional, that love had limits, that some lives mattered more than others. I simply returned their lessons wrapped in a check they couldn't refuse and a truth they couldn't escape. And I moved forward into a future they'd never be part of, carrying Lucas's memory with me, finally at peace.